Putin's biggest threat isn't NATO. It isn't Ukraine. It's Russia itself. For nearly 3 years, he's poured everything into his war, bleeding his military dry, wrecking his economy, and turning his country into a pressure cooker of unrest. Now, that pressure is reaching a breaking point. His war isn't just failing, it's tearing Russia apart from the inside. Cracks are forming in his inner circle, whispers of rebellion are spreading, and the Russian people are growing restless. Could a coup be on the horizon? Could Putin's downfall trigger a collapse that sends Russia spiraling into total instability? Let's break down how Putin's war is backfiring, why his hold on power is slipping, and what this could mean for the future of Russia itself. We start with an October 8, 2024 interview with former British ambassador to Ukraine Lee Turner on Times Radio. Turner doesn't waste time. He tackles the big question right away. Could a coup really happen in Russia? His answer? History says yes. If you look at the history of modern Russia, you will see that there have been 3 coups or putsches since 1991. And he's right. First, in August 1991, hardline Soviet officials tried and failed to overthrow Mikhail Gorbachev in the wake of the USSR's collapse. That coup lasted just 3 days, but set the stage for the authoritarian Russia we see today. Then, in 1993, President Boris Yeltsin faced his own coup attempt, and more recently, in 2023, Wagner boss Yevgeny Prigozhin led an armed march toward Moscow, openly challenging Putin's grip on power. More on him later. But Russia's coup history doesn't start there. It's been a pattern for centuries. From the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution that overthrew Tsar Nicholas II to the near century of instability known as the Times of Troubles in the 17th century, Russian rulers have a long track record of being toppled when things go south. For someone who prides himself on knowing Russian history, Putin should be more worried, and he should have been paying attention when the Wagner Group gave him a preview of what a rebellion looks like. For much of 2023, Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin was openly feuding with Russia's defense minister Sergei Shoigu. Prigozhin accused Shoigu of lying about the war's objectives, claiming demilitarization and denazification were never the real goals. Instead, he said, it was just a power grab that Shoigu pushed to earn himself another Hero of Russia medal. The feud escalated. Prigozhin even accused the Russian military of attacking Wagner fighters, claiming many victims. Then came June 23, 2023, the moment things exploded. Wagner troops took over a key Russian military command center and began marching toward Moscow. Within hours, it looked like Putin's reign was hanging by a thread. Then, just as quickly, it was over. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko brokered a peace deal, and the rebellion ended without a full-blown battle. But the message was clear. Putin wasn't as untouchable as he wanted the world to believe. 2 months later, Prigozhin was dead, killed in a plane crash that no one really believes was an accident. But here's why this matters now. Turner points out that the Russian elite, the people who keep Putin in power, know the war is a disaster. The economy is in trouble. They have awful demographic problems in Russia. Their population is falling like a stone. In other words, the cracks are forming at the top. And when the elites start questioning whether Putin is still the best bet for keeping their wealth and power intact, that's when things get really dangerous for him. Just like Prigozhin, they might be waiting for the right moment to make a move, but the elite aren't Putin's only problem. The people suffering the most from this war aren't in Kremlin boardrooms, they're on the front lines. And with each passing day, Putin's war machine is running out of one crucial resource: young men. Putin also hasn't helped his case by constantly lying about Russia's so-called red lines. From the start of the Ukraine war, Putin warned of dire consequences if the West crossed certain boundaries, providing tanks, sending long-range missiles, allowing Ukraine to strike inside Russia. Each time, he rattled his nuclear saber, hinting at retaliation, and yet, one by one, those lines were crossed. Western aid keeps pouring in, Ukraine has invaded Kursk, and now, American long-range missiles are striking Russian territory. And what has Putin done? Nothing. Despite his threats, there have been no nuclear strikes, no military retaliation against NATO. Each empty warning chips away at his strongman image. Former British ambassador to Ukraine Lee Turner calls this Putin's madman strategy. The idea is simple. Act so unpredictably, so recklessly, that your enemies hesitate, fearing you might actually do something insane. But there's a problem. Putin's enemies have called his bluff too many times. He keeps making threats, but he never follows through. That weakness doesn't go unnoticed. The Russian people, already struggling under the weight of war, are seeing their leader's true nature. He's not an invincible mastermind. He's not an all-powerful czar. He's a man who keeps making promises he can't keep, and that's dangerous for him. If enough Russians stop believing in Putin's strength, it creates space for someone else to step in, someone who promises to deliver where Putin has failed. A charismatic figure who can unite the disillusioned masses, whether they be war-weary civilians or hardliners who think Putin isn't going far enough. That's all it takes for a coup to gain momentum. And here's the kicker. Most Russians likely don't even care about Ukraine. Turner offers a revealing anecdote. Back in 2010, during democratic elections in Crimea, a pro-Russian party named Russian Unity was expected to perform well, given the region's predominantly Russian-speaking population. It flopped. Just 4% of voters supported the party. Even among Russians in Crimea, there was little desire to be absorbed into Russia. Then there was the taxi driver Turner spoke with, a former Russian Marine. When asked if he wanted Crimea to be a part of Russia, the man shrugged and said, "I don't give a toss." And yet, Putin built his entire justification for war on the idea that Russians long for Ukrainian land. The reality? Most of them don't care. What they do care about is their country bleeding itself dry, losing hundreds of thousands of men, spending billions on a war that brings nothing but hardship. So, we have multiple factors stacking up against Putin. His red lines have been exposed as bluffs. His war is losing support. His economy is crumbling. The elites are growing restless. And we're not done. On December 2nd, OSINT analyst Ryan Macbeth explained why the Ukraine war isn't just hurting Russia. It's crushing the very people Putin claims to protect. OSINT, or Open Source Intelligence, refers to analysts who gather and study publicly available data, and Macbeth's findings are damning. If Russia wins the war, their economy goes to hell, he says. Interest rates are at 21%. Prices have surged 30% since 2022, and every single person in Russia is either in the army or working in a munitions factory. That last part is crucial. Russia has become a war economy. The Atlantic Council warns that while it may seem stable now, the long-term economic outlook is increasingly precarious. Macbeth explains why. If there's a ceasefire tomorrow, the wheels come off their economy. Putin has dug Russia in so deep that he can't just stop the war. He has to figure out a way to cool things off gradually. But gradual isn't an option. If Trump's peace plan is successful and the war ends suddenly, Russia's economy will implode. Thousands of munitions workers will be out of jobs overnight. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers will return home with no work waiting for them. That's a recipe for disaster. And it's exactly why many believe Putin is dragging this war out for as long as possible. The moment it ends, his entire system unravels. Now, let's take this a step further. Lee Turner already pointed out that many Russian elites don't support this war. We saw that with Prigozhin's short-lived Wagner mutiny. But Prigozhin wasn't the only one. In August 2024, former KGB agent and private military leader Georgy Zagrevsky launched his own tirade against Putin. Russia isn't on the brink of disaster, he said. It's already there. And what was happening at the time? Ukraine had invaded Kursk. Drones were striking Moscow. The Black Sea Fleet had lost a third of its capacity. Zagrevsky sneered, calling it all the work of the great Putin. So what happens if Trump's peace plan goes through? You have thousands of men who are now jobless and struggling to get along thanks to the war machine shutting down. Many thousands more, all with weapons and military training, are streaming back into the country only to find that there's nothing much there for them. How much would it take for a man like Zagrevsky to mobilize all of those disenfranchised Russians to organize a coup against the president who created that situation? We may never know. But the collapse of Russia's economy, if a ceasefire occurred, would add another ingredient to the coup recipe, that is already starting to bubble up nicely. Once people start feeling the pain of getting fired from their jobs, along with high inflation, that usually causes revolutions. And that's when you might see a couple of army officers think, you know what, I can probably do this a little bit better, says Macbeth. Those problems are compounded by state of the Russian economy even before the war began. It's going to be extremely difficult to extricate themselves from Ukraine, mainly because Russia never really exported a lot to the West other than natural resources, Macbeth explains. Gas, oil, and raw materials were the fulcrum around which Russia's entire economy pivoted before the war. In 2021 alone, oil and gas attributed over 17% of Russia's gross domestic product, or GDP, for every quarter of the year. And there are plenty of times when it's accounted for over 20% of the GDP. That isn't likely to change should the Ukraine war end. But what has already changed is the West's approach to Russia. Thousands of sanctions are already in place and look unlikely to be removed even if Russia declares a ceasefire. Europe is also rapidly moving away from relying on Russia to supply its oil and gas, meaning problems for Russia's energy industry lie ahead. As for manufacturing and general products, Russia was never a particularly big contributor of either, so Putin can't rely on them to pull him out of the economic fire he's lit. Macbeth contrasts this to the situation the U.S. faced in the wake of World War II. When World War II ended in the United States, there was a recession that lasted about 8 months, he says. At least at that point, the United States was able to sell goods to the entire world. Russia doesn't have that option. Macbeth says the rest of the world doesn't really buy much from Russia beyond its energy and raw materials, so the collapse of Putin's war machine again means that millions of people will be out of jobs. More economic strife to fuel the coup. Macbeth adds that the future doesn't seem bright for Putin and his hold over Russia. He suggests that at some point, either if the war drags on even longer or if a ceasefire plunges Russia into economic chaos, we're going to see a game of musical chairs play out among Russia's top generals. All of them will be jockeying for position, with many trying to get into power because, as Macbeth said earlier, they believe they can do a better job than Putin in Russia. That puts Putin in a terrible position. He either keeps the war going, which only leads to the average Russian becoming ever more disenfranchised with his rule. That lays the groundwork for a coup. Or he agrees to a ceasefire. That's surely to plunge his country into economic chaos, opening the door for those who oppose him to rally the people feeling the financial pinch to rebel against him. Either way, a coup is incoming. And worst of all for Putin is that he may not even see it coming. Macbeth points out that Russia's leader surrounds himself with yes-men and people who insulate him from all of the bad news that would serve as signals of an impending coup. Putin hears what he wants to hear because he's created a system designed to deliver nothing else. That gives Putin the false impression that he's infallible, that he's the smartest man in every single room. And it does that while shielding from the reality that many of his people, be those everyday Russians or some of the elite he would count on as being close to him, are just counting the days until they can remove him from power. Ultimately, Putin will be the architect of his own downfall. The only question remaining, at least in the eyes of Turner and Macbeth, is when the Russian people will finally say, enough is enough. What do you think? Is Russia truly on the verge of a coup? Or will Putin find a way to hold on to power? Will Ukraine be the one to bring him down? Or will his own people turn against him? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the biggest geopolitical events shaping our world. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.